Hi everybody and welcome to the Colored Gemstone Academy. I'm your instructor Paul Deasy, and this is one of my gemstone lessons on one of my very favorite subjects. This is Ethiopian opal. Now first of all, I know what you're thinking. Paul, why don't you just say opals and tell us where all the opals come from? Sure, I could do that. I could tell you that everybody knows about the Australian opals. I've visited mines in Australia. You've heard of perhaps the Mexican fire opals, a kind of orange faceted stone. Maybe you've even heard of the Peruvian blue or the Peruvian pink opals. Yes, I've presented those many times over the years. Maybe you even saw in my book, Opals by Paul Deasy, shameless plug. Maybe you've even seen some pictures in there from the Virgin Valley opal mines in northern Nevada near the border of Oregon. Yeah, all of those places exist, and opal is one of my favorite gemstones. But why am I singling out the Ethiopian opal? And I will tell you why. It is probably the single most significant gem deposit discovery in my lifetime. I was born in 1960, it is now 2020, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of Ethiopian opal. I've been a big fan of opal for a long time. And basically, Australian opal, I've owned pieces, I've sold pieces, all those other mines that I told you about. But I remember being at a show one time in probably Tucson, International Gem Show, and I picked up this Ethiopian opal. And it was a beautiful specimen. And I want to say this was probably would have been in maybe the year 2000 or before. And the reason I never paid it any mind, in fact, my book, I wrote this in about 2009. It was published in 2010, and there's not one mention in my book on Ethiopian opal. So full disclosure, I want you to know that before you go looking for my book on opals. When I picked up this little specimen that I fell in love with, I said, you know what? It's really not mined in any commercial qualities and quantities in Ethiopia. So this is basically collector stuff, and this has been a piece that I've enjoyed. I have a picture of this opal in my Colored Gemstone book by Paul Deasy. But basically, in the mid-1990s is when the opal was first discovered in Ethiopia. And if you take a look at the map of the country of Ethiopia in Africa, you'll see that right there in the center of that map is the capital of the country. It's called Addis Ababa. And if you go all the way north above that, right almost on the northern border of Ethiopia, you will see an area there, and I think they call it Aksum, is how you pronounce it. And they actually mine sapphires there. But about midway between the top of the country and the middle of the country is another mining area they discovered in the mid-1990s, and it is called Wegeltena. Wegeltena is a mining town, and it is, as I said, about halfway between the top of the country and the middle of the country, and it's in a very, very high elevation. If you can imagine, it's like a farming land that's about 10,000 feet above sea level, 3,000 meters, and in between these big fertile places on top is a huge valley. And the valley dips down about, let's say, another 3,000 meters. So the closest I can kind of equate that to would be if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. If you've been on one of the rims and you can see it just goes down so deep, it's just, the river just, ran through it. And it's about a mile in some places in the Grand Canyon from the rim to the bottom where the Colorado River is flowing. Well, the same is true of this area where the opal mining is. Very high, about 10,000 feet above sea level. And then you have that valley going down about 3,000 meters. Very difficult to get there. There's no machinery in there when they're mining it. People are hiking to where it is. They are mining by hand very, very primitively. And they're only taking out what they consider to be gem quality opal. They would not take a piece like that. And even though they would find this in the frequently in the mining process, this is what they call, at least in the Australia opal mine, they call that potch. And this is a silica based stone, but it has no play of color, and that's what you're looking for in an opal. is play of color. So I wanted to talk to you about how difficult it is to get there, how hard it is to mine this. And again, they don't bring in trucks, they don't bring in bulldozers, they don't bring in blasting or dynamite. It is all done by hand. But let's go back in time a little bit again. So I had owned one of my favorite little specimens. Let me bring it real close so you can see that play of color in there. And I noticed it had like a chocolate brown body color. It reminded me of a black opal that you might see in Lightning Ridge in Australia. But at that point in the mid-90s, there were no commercial quantities really available. I didn't consider it to be a gem quality product. Then fast forward to about 2008-ish, 2010, they started to find larger quantities of the typical white crystal quality opals out of Ethiopia. Sorry about that glare for my little lights in there. But anyway, that's a gem quality Ethiopian opal. I happened to be around that time at the AGTA show in Vegas. And it was amazing. A friend of mine who I've known in the opal business for a long time, in fact, I visited him in the Australian opal mines in the early 2000s. His name is Peter Vida. He introduced me to an acquaintance of his who showed me some incredible samples of some of the most beautiful opal I had ever seen. And Peter said, "Where do you think that came from?" And so I asked the guy, I said, "So is this from Mintaby?" He said, "No." "Is this from Coober Pedy?" "No." "Lightning Ridge?" "No." These are all mining locations in Australia that I visited and was familiar with. He said, "These are from Ethiopia." And I was awestruck. I said, "I didn't think that they had any commercially viable gem grade opal coming out of Ethiopia." He said, "Oh, I've been working with this for a couple of years. It's amazing." I said, he says, I want you to pick up a piece. So I picked up a piece and he said, "Touch it." And I touched it and it stuck to my finger. And he said, the difference between this opal and the Australian opal is Australian opal, most opal is, a certain percentage of water content in the opal. He said this opal from Ethiopia, we call it hydrophane opal because it absorbs water. It doesn't have water, there's no water in it, so there's no crazing really that seems to take place with this opal. I've been working with it, it's like a dream. So based on that, I ended up making that, and I was the very first person to offer this in the televised shopping world, and it was on Shop NBC right about that time, 2010, and from that time it has been one of my most popular selling gemstones. And remember, opals are about a phenomenon called play of color. And that phenomenon, play of color, is caused by these microscopic little spheres inside that gem that scatter the light and return different colors back to your eye. So the way I described it before is it's like if you have a big box of ping pong balls that were microscopically small, the light's bending around all those silica spheres. So what are the important things that you need to know about any opal, including the Ethiopian opal? Number one, hardness is 5 to 6.5. Now, is that really brittle? No, not really. If you think of quartz, it's a 7. So your opal is going to be between 5 and 6.5. Toughness, however, is considered to be between poor to fair in its toughness. Now remember, we go through this all the time. Hardness is the ability to withstand scratching. That's 5.5 or 5 to 6.5 range on the Mohs scale. And then the toughness is the ability to withstand cracking and chipping, and that is poor to fair on that scale. The refractive index, 1.37 to 1.47. Now we don't think of opal as a sparkly gemstone, so we're not worried about the refractive index. The specific gravity is a 2, which is not huge, but it's pretty lightweight. So even if you're getting opal earrings, that's something that you can wear with confidence. They're not going to be too terribly heavy. It is the birthstone for the month of October. It is also the 14th anniversary stone. Nowhere in the traditional stones of the zodiac do I find opal, so it's not something that is part of the zodiac stones. Now, It is, to me, still the single best value anywhere in the world in a stone of opal that you can get that has a tremendous fire, that play of color that is in there. It even has a variety of body colors. And when you think about the difference between a black opal and a white crystal opal, in between that range, the darker the body color, the better the play of color that you see. And you can see a lot of that. And it also shows tremendously. It photographs much easier than, in my opinion, the Australian opal does. Now again, I'm a huge fan of Australian opal. I own a lot of them myself. But it is an amazing opportunity if you're born in the month of October, or you just love that play of color that goes with everything that you own. I think that you're really going to love the Ethiopian opal. So that's going to be my little mini series. I'll do some other opal lessons when we'll talk about the Australia and the other types of opal. But this was your lesson on the Ethiopian opal, one of the newest members of the gemstone family. Have a great day. I'll see you next week with another lesson on the Colored Gemstone Academy.